this time because you're also on the west coast of the US. Welcome everybody to Rasa Office Hours with the fabulous Ben, who has actually been here before, so you may recognize him from that. And thanks so much for doing this today, Ben. I know you've been very busy with clients. I was gonna say work. This is work too. Yeah,
Yeah.
so before we get too into it, um, is there anything you want to share with the community?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit about me and there's, if any questions come up about that. So Ben, I'm a NLP solutions engineer at Rasa. So my day to day is I basically work with, clients, customers, corporations, to get their Rasa assistance into production. So that's the goal. We work with them POCs and projects, but the goal is really getting them to roll out, Rasa open source and Rasa enterprise to the kind of the wide range of users and build, build smart assistants. And my background is in machine learning, both in graduate school, and then spent a couple years at Disney doing machine learning there as well. And just personally, having worked on a host of different NLU tools. When I first got introduced to Rasa, I was just super impressed, and that's kind of how I got into Rasa, and just how I ended up kind of being on the other side and joining the team as well. And it's been great so far.
And I'm going to ask a vague question, so you don't have to reveal anything private. But what is, you would say, in your experience, one of the most common sticking points in getting a bot, from POC to production? Where do folks tend to run into issues?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the mindset about testing, about sharing the assistant, about making sure you collect the real user data. I think a lot of times there's a gap between creating a POC, having some idea of like business requirements, but kind of being too focused on that and not sharing, not having user tests, not collecting real data to iterate, tends to be kind of the biggest roadblock that I've seen.
Yeah, I think that plays into something that I think the NLP community in general has really been, I don't want to say necessarily struggling with, but definitely talking about, and it's been an area of sort of active work, is how do you know when an NLP system is working? So particularly when the end goal is to interact with a human user. So a good example is like natural language generation. How can you tell when you've generated good language? Or in dialogue systems, how can you tell when a dialogue system is working well? And some people sort of use proxies of that. So like, how long does somebody talk to the system, particularly for chatbots? Maybe you ask for like ratings of how well the system did, but consumer feedback ratings are almost always skewed because people only tend to give feedback when they're upset. So that doesn't always give you the best impression of an assistant, especially if it's an assistant that works really well and then there's a mistake and, expectations were high and now the user's very upset because expectations were high. And when I've sort of come down on this, and I think where the Rasa solution would be is that knowing if it works well is looking if it can do the thing that humans want when they're using it. Human evaluation is the only way to go, and tests based on human conversations are one way of automating that. Whew. Coffee.
Yeah, and basically from what I've seen, a lot of it is, making sure your tests are domain specific, right? I think we just touched on this, talking about learning and making sure that talking about zero shot learning in that context, but because of just where the field is now, the focus is a lot when I'm working with customers on a day-to-day that your NLU model has to be domain specific. It has to be contextual in terms of the data that's pulling in, because the way users talk on a website, on a certain forum post, on voice, it's all different, right? So that's sort of the key there as far as user testing, always. So
Yeah, like I definitely don't, text my friends the same way that I write professional emails. All right, so we've got a question from Martina. Hey, Ben and Rachel. Hey, Martina. do you recommend any resources to start learning NLP and ML from scratch, which makes us sure about which algorithm to use and when? Oh, okay, so this is a really like instrumental approach to learning. How can I learn what tools to use in what situation?
Hmm. I
I mean,
guess.
I
I
can start
mean,
with,
yeah. I was like,
okay.
you might have a better insight into that answer.
Um, yeah, I would say in general, so like what algorithms to use is rough to answer because the answer changes a lot. And I would say what's generally more helpful for folks in my experience is knowing about different tasks in NLP and machine learning. So a task is usually has some sort of data set. It's some sort of specific thing you're building a system to do. And the research community generally like coalesces around particular tasks that might be associated with specific data sets. So the big dialogue data set is Multibot.
Yeah, it's the conversation one, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
WOZ
yeah,
is WOZ.
yeah.
It looks like woes, but I think it said was. Um, and the tasks are usually like, build a system that can handle the train test split on this specific thing. And what works really well and what people are using is going to change over time. Yeah, so I would recommend starting with a focus on different tasks. And a good way to do that, I mean, speech and language processing is sort of the default recommendation that a lot of people make. And I'll pull up the and that'll give you sort of like a broad overview of the work so far. Let me pull up the browser so folks can see. And it is available for free online. My browser's too
Oh,
skinny.
this is the Stanford one, right? I was going to mention that. I was like, yeah, the Stanford ones are awesome.
Yep. By Dan Drafsky and James Martin. And it talks about sort of a lot of the core algorithms in NLP. But also, I would say, as much as possible, use somebody else's library that already works. You don't have to do stuff from scratch. All right, I need to fix the browser. Yeah. So hopefully that helps. I'd start there, and then depending on the so it'll go through a bunch of different stuff, and then depending on the specific task that you're interested in, I would search the ACL anthology. Let me pull that up as well. So the nice thing about not linguistics, but natural language processing is that the biggest conferences, which are the main publication venue, publish all their research for free. And it is aclweb.org/anthology. And this is all of the published papers from the fanciest conferences all the way back to the 70s. So you got a lot of material here to help you answer your questions. Yeah, I hope that helps. It's a big field. You have anything you wanted to add, Ben?
No, actually, yeah, the Stanford was what I was going to point to, and actually that was one of that course, and then the I think 231N, the computer vision one, were the two ones that I sort of got started with when I was just getting into machine learning. So they're great.
And we have a question from Anas, perhaps. I apologize if I'm saying your name incorrectly. I have a technical question. We have a technical answer. I have a Rasa chatbot, and I'm trying to test it using Botium, B-O-T-I-U-M. The configuration file cannot find the Rasa module. I don't think I've used this previously. Do you have any resources for testing using Botium or anything to solve this problem? It's related to the Botium Rasa connector. Oh, hello, sunshine. You are ruining my lighting setup.
Let's see, so I have not used Bodium very much in particular, but let me take a look.
So it is this one, I'm assuming. Bots testing bots. Oh, gotcha. So it's So it looks like it's a chatbot that tests chatbots.
Okay. Well, I guess
Yeah.
my question would be if there's any way you can just run your testing in the context of Rasa, right? Because we do have, through our command line, if you do Rasa tests, and we can share some documentation on that. But basically, you'll have a way to kind of reproduce, all these kind of testing criteria and embody them just directly through Rasa. So you can test NLU, you can test real conversations, and all that can be done through the command line.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we don't always get to choose the tools we use. My preference in general would not be to use a conversational agent to test a conversational agent, because you tend to get into sort of I don't know, you go down weird paths and things happen that would not happen if a human were talking to an assistant. And I'm not super familiar with this platform, so maybe they've handled that problem, but it is something to just be aware of. Like we were talking about human evaluation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I'm going to read the next question and then go close my blinds because this is untenable. Yasmine says, I have 2 retrieval intents, FAQ and chit chat, and when I provide a random input, Rasa NLU returns a high confidence, which is incorrect because I don't have the tokens in the training data. What would you recommend, Ben?
Well, I guess my question would be, when you say you don't have the tokens in the training data, is that you're talking about like the NLU training phrases, or yeah, I'm just trying to think. Tokens. What context would this be?
Yeah, my guess would be in the NLU training data. So something I've been talking about in live streams is sort of amount of token overlap. But you don't have to have the exact tokens necessarily, because they run through a futurizer that is based on, well, depending on what your futurizer is, but they run through a futurizer which projects your words into some sort of multi-dimensional space based on some sort of training corpus, and words that have been used together in similar situations in the training corpus will be close to each other in that multi-dimensional space. So you can sort of, words that are close but not exactly the words you provided will still be caught okay. I would say if you have super high confidence and it's wrong, I would add more training data. And if you've tuned your number of training rounds or epochs, I would try reducing that and see if that helps, because that sounds like overfitting to me. That's my general recommendation there. But I would say we generally recommend around 20 examples per intent if possible. All right. Yash says, any discount or promo code for the Rasa Summit? We have one that we shared a couple videos ago, that the office hours we did with Karen. So I can pull that up and share it again in the chat. Ross says, please share the resources for best bot testing tools. Yeah, for sure. Let me pop open the browser. Rasa open source. So I would actually zoom out a little bit. Would be a good first step there. So I would, do you remember where it is off the top of your head? I can just search for it.
It's maybe under best practices. Okay, yeah. Oh, building your assistant. That's right. Yeah.
There you go. So building your assistant, preparing for production, testing for assistant. So validating data is something you would do before you train your assistant, and that'll be done automatically. And then you write little example conversations, so what the user says and what you want that to be recognized as. And you can start by writing these by hand, but you can also take conversations that an assistant has had or that you have had with your assistant using interactive learning and turn those into tests as well. And there's a really nice interface for doing that in Rasa X, where you're like, this conversation, add it to my tests. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and I will say, just working with a lot of clients, that is our like enterprise recommendation as well. Having real test users and just basically sourcing the stories from there using Rasa X directly. So
yeah, the I mean, the goal is for it to work for people. So if you have data from people, hopefully that will be the best representation of what you need to do in the future. I'm trying to find the test code. Next question. Oh, you're really well positioned to answer this. Martina wants to know, what's the difference between the free and enterprise version of Rasa X?
Yeah, so the difference is really a couple enterprise features. So role-based access control, which basically gives you the ability to control for certain users, the ability to make changes or maybe only modify certain things or only view, certain things in the context of that Rasa X UI. So role-based access control would be one. Another would be single sign-on. So, Okta or any kind of enterprise single sign-on integration is only available in Rasa Enterprise. And the kind of last, I guess, feature of note would be the analytics tab or analytics page is only available in Rasa Enterprise.
I'm just sharing the link here, and this is for our community members. But if you're watching the stream, I think you're a community member. So there we go. All right. Thank you for that rundown, Ben. I probably wouldn't have known that off the top of my head. I would have had to have looked it up. Goku Lakanen, again, sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly, says, hello, Ben and Rachel. Hi. I have made a chatbot and I want to deploy it in the cloud so that students can use it. When I use ngrok, it runs only if the server is on in my desktop. Yeah, that's true. Can you suggest other platforms? I've tried Heroku and Docker, but got dependency issues for Rasa. I can tell you off the top of my head, if you're using the free version of Heroku, a very minimal Rasa assistant is right on the upper edge of the size of a free container you can create. So you can try Heroku. If you're trying the free tier, it's going to be a squeaker.
Yeah, and I would say we definitely recommend Docker. That's sort of the easiest way to go as far as just getting it up on a server and running. And in terms of dependency issues, we do have a Rasa open source Docker image hosted in Docker Hub, so that would be the best place just to pull from, since that does come prepackaged with all the dependencies you would need to run your model, to make all the predictions and everything there. So.
Yeah, and what I'm just looking up now is we do have a little installation tutorial playlist on our YouTube that includes installing Rasa X on GCP, I believe, which you could use to share your assistant. So I'm just gonna double check that video is in that playlist.
Today I'm going to show you how to install Rasa.
Yeah,
sorry, you're all hearing that.
Just to add to that, so one nice thing about just deploying Rasa X, based on I think the video that Rachel is looking for, is that it comes packaged with Rasa open source too. So then when you spin that up, it'll run Rasa open source through you as well, and you can load in your model file and serve it just as if you had only spun up Rasa open source, but with the UI on top. So that is kind of a nice add or a nice feature.
Yeah, and the video title is Installing Rasa X, Windows 10s on Google Cloud Platform. It works on GCP without being on Windows 10. That just happened to be the OS I was using. Good question. Yeah, I hope you get that up and running. I think that'll be fun for your students. Yasmine says, in the NLU part, I don't use characters, cars, engrams. Even when I use Arabic letters, it gives me high confidence. I don't have intents containing Arabic letters. So it's an example where there's no Arabic text in the training data, but it's still being handled with high intent. Yasmine was the same person who was having retrieval intents with high confidence earlier.
Okay, yeah, so I think one thing to kind of check in your configuration is that you have an out of vocabulary token defined, because that'll help basically capture things that are maybe characters that are out of context or things that you haven't added in your training data. So adding that in, and then I think most likely thinking about sort of how your assistant should handle that, right? If someone comes in with that, say, Arabic character or some character that you're not intended to process, maybe creating like an out of scope intent and just putting some of those out of vocabulary cases training, and then it will kind of get mapped based on that futurizer.
I'm looking for the there we go, the out of vocabulary section in here. So this is in Rasa docs, concepts, config, pipeline, components, count vectors, futurizer. So more information on that. And Buena Polly says, is there any video about Rasa Docker with dependencies, like a full Docker install? What's in the installation guides? I mean, the, so, let me turn the browser back on. Pew. So the GCP install includes the quick install script, which will install a Docker with dependencies from a help chart, which, let's go to Rasa X. So that's going to be the easiest way to do it. I will say that I am not great at Docker. It is not my main area of expertise, but the quick install has really made my life a lot easier.
Yeah, the quick install should just be like a one-line script, so that definitely just makes things a lot easier. Yeah, just run that command and it'll pretty much get everything running for you.
You do have to have network access in whatever environment you're running this in. That is one thing I did run into. You have to allow that. Well, like I mentioned, I am not the best at Docker, but I'd give that a shot. All right. Next question. Hello, Konstantinos. Oh, same thing happens with Greek. So I think that's what's happening with, that Yasmine was mentioning with Arabic as well, where there are characters that have not been seen in the training data, but are being handled with high confidence. So having high confidence does not mean that your model is necessarily doing a good job. And if the confidence is very high, that might be evidence that you would benefit from having more training data, potentially. It's probably going to be the easiest fixed. Or using a smaller pre-trained model, or yeah, I don't know if you know anything about the characters level stuff in particular, but
yeah, I mean, I'd say the general recommendation is to look at those specific cases and just make sure they get added back into your NLU data, just to kind of iterate on the tuning. But yeah, I think like we kind of touched on earlier, putting an out of vocabulary token, I think is probably going to be a good idea in your pipeline. So.
And if you are in a situation where people are going to be trying to using your assistant in multiple languages, but it only supports one, I might even create an out of scope intent that's like, hey, I see you're trying to use Egyptian Arabic, and this assistant can't support that yet. All right. Next question. Goku Lakanen says, can you suggest to me how to run actions server along with my model? Yeah, does the Helm chart, does the quick install, it doesn't do the action server, right? You have to do that separately using I remember this, a Docker image that you clone into your environment, yeah?
Yeah, so by default, it'll spin up, it'll run the action server, but yeah, like you said, you have to, in the case that, obviously you want to run your own actions code, you'll have to package that as a Docker image and have that pull that case, or make sure it's available as an image.
So in the browser, now that I have it added, adding a custom action server will walk you through the steps. And like I mentioned, I am not great at Docker, but I found this pretty easy to follow last time that I did it. So you do have to build your own action server image, but we can walk you through it in the docs. So I hope that helps. All right. Omar wants to know, is there a way to make a chatbot dynamic? For example, slots, instead of declare all the slots, I'll just add it in the database.
No. So yeah, your slots, well, in the context of Rasa, right? In the way that Rasa uses, say, slots and entities, they do have to be defined at train time. So, they have to be static in that sense. But I think sort of in the context of your question about, say a database or a backend system, when you run your custom actions, that can all be dynamic, right? So you can set up the API calls, you can make the dynamic request to the database, get some information back, and then kind of do some processing or run code in that sense. So that part can be dynamic, but the slots in the context of Rasa will have to be kind of predefined or static. So.
And I'm also not a security researcher, but my understanding is that very flexible access to a database through a interface can be a little bit of a difficult thing to do securely. So, and you may already know all about that, and this is like a very secure thing, but just like in general, I wouldn't recommend like be able to query a whole database from a chatbot.
Yeah.
And Buena Polly says, any video about installing Rasa Docker with dependencies? Oh, like installing Docker? Ooh, so if you're asking about how to install Rasa in Docker, I think the Rasa X Helm chart will be the most helpful. And I mean, you can install Rasa X and not use it, but if you are deploying an assistant, we've tried really hard to make it very useful for understanding how people are using your assistant and just like going through maintenance tasks pretty straightforwardly. So we think you'll like it, but the Helm chart's probably the easiest way.
Yeah, just to add to that, with the Helm chart, you have the ability to basically point to your, if you have a particular Rasa image or action server image, and that's all configurable, and I think documented as well. So
in here, and if you need to use a special your specific Docker Compose, this is the best option. This video might be a little bit out of date, but it might still work. All right, next question. Constantine has a longish one, so get ready for me to read for a bit. If we use a pre-trained model in our pipeline and the user enters a single word that was probably not in the training corpus, e.g. key smash. Key smash was not the word. The word was an example of key smash. How is that handled? I've noticed all similar words end up with the same confidence in the same intent. In count vector futurizer, they are out of vocabulary, but what about unknown words in a pre-trained model?
I believe that depends on how that model was trained, right? Like if it's BERT or actually, I'm not. Do you know how BERT assigns out of vocabulary tokens? I'm actually not.
Well, BERT is word piece, so the token is not the word. The token is the subpart of the word. It was also trained on web text, so the likelihood that a specific key smashes out of vocabulary is actually like kind of weirdly low. So web text is a specific corpus that includes text from the web. You got it. And sort of anything that includes a lot of noisy user-generated text is likely to include tokens that you wouldn't find in a dictionary, for example. It is interesting that they're all getting the same confidence, which suggests to me that they might be getting assigned to a specific sort of bin token. It does depend on what pre-trained model you're used. I think fast text can also assign vectors to previously unseen tokens. I don't think glove can if you're using glove. I'm trying to remember all like the specific model details off the top of my head. So depending on your pre-trained model, I would look at either the README for that model or the original paper that proposes it, because both of those places will probably be discussed. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Oh, it is count vector futurizer.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in the case of the count vectors futurizer, though, as long as you define an out of vocabulary token, even if you have a pre-trained model, right, it'll still be fed in. So, yeah, I think it might be sort of dependent. I think what Rachel kind of mentioned earlier is that you have, I guess, sufficient training examples and just some examples of where the out of vocabulary token kind of should be assigned per intent. So,
yeah. If it is digits, that could be something that's being treated as one thing as well, potentially. Yeah, I'd have to dig more into the specific models you're using. Oh, I'm also pretty quiet. Let me talk a little bit louder and move my mic in closer so I am less quiet. I'm very tired. I got woken up in the middle of the night last night. Goku Lakanen says, can Helm charts, I haven't explored this yet, be used for deploying a chatbot in Telegram, say, permanently? Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about what Helm charts are and why they're useful?
yeah, so Helm charts are basically a method of deployment for Kubernetes. So if you're deploying like a Kubernetes cluster, and I think, I'm not sure if we have any documentation on what that describes, but basically the nice thing about Kubernetes is that it helps you scale better. So say you're running Rasa open source in production, and you want to scale to millions, hundreds of thousands of users. You have the ability to basically create replica pods, and Kubernetes will take care of the load balancing and kind of the routing in that sense. And so I guess in the context of Telegram and being able to deploy, that definitely is you can. So basically all the channel connectors that we have pre-built with Rasa open source will work with our Helm chart in our and in a Kubernetes environment. So as long as you get that configured properly in the context of your Helm chart, yeah, it'll definitely work.
And my understanding is that the Helm chart is a set of instructions for creating a pod and what goes in it and what goes in each little copy that it creates. I know they have different names. I cannot for the life of me remember all the specialized Kubernetes words. So with the Helm chart, you still have to have like a place that it is run, but it will tell your Kubernetes instance what to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically like an instruction set for setting up your cluster, right? So in your cluster, right, which pod or which containers to run, how many to run, where it should call, where it should be routed if someone hits the endpoint to the Telegram, and kind of all that instruction set.
I hope that helps. Konstantina says, it's BERT and Spacey, but Greek, so I'm not sure they were trained with web text. Oh, I don't know about Spacey. I think MBERT was trained, I'm assuming this is multilingual BERT, the Greek version. I think MBERT was trained on Wikipedia. Yeah, interesting. And BERT, I don't know what the tokenizer would be for Greek either. Yeah, I don't know. And I do know that Greek has a much less impoverished morphology than English, so interesting. Yeah, I might post about that on the forums, particularly if you're both getting the same confidence for a range of tokens. That feels surprising.
Yeah, especially if the featurizers are already trained on that language, right? That does seem a little strange. Yeah.
Yeah, this seems like it might be an edge case. Not that either Greek or Arabic are edge languages or in any way less than English, but there may have been some assumptions made at some point in the process by somebody in some team that is affecting certain character sets. Goku says, I know Kubernetes is used for orchestration, right? Yep. And later on, thanks. Yeah, I hope that helps. Chris says, how can a Rasa bot handle multiple languages? I mean, the two, if you have a large training corpus with both languages together, you can train your own assistant. But if you're trying to use pre-trained resources, the easiest thing is going to be to build at least two separate NLU bits.
Yeah, that is kind of the general recommendation, and working with teams that are like in production, companies that are doing that, that's usually the case where, we recommend training separate NLU models, and then having that feed into probably the same dialog management model if the stories apply or the intents are, apply universally across both models. So.
Yeah, multilingual models are difficult because the training data is usually not available to the same scale. Oh, and I started talking quietly again. Amir says, could you please give us some insights about how Rasa NLU would scale with the number of training samples in terms of performance, training time, and memory consumption? So let's say the difference between, 1 million training examples across your intents and 20, I guess.
So it's going to be dependent on, first of all, what featurizers you're using in your pipeline, because that's going to determine, how long it takes to train your intent classifiers, because it's based on those input features. So I'm not sure if I have sort of an exact number as far as, as you increase the number of training examples, how well it scales. But I will say just on the prediction side, it's not really going to make that big of a difference in terms of performance. So once you have that trained model, whether it be trained on 20 examples or 100, the performance as far as prediction is going to be pretty similar. And in terms of training, that's going to kind of vary. I've seen, as long as a few hours, if it's like, hundreds of thousands of training examples. In that case, the recommendation is to kind of use a GPU or, some kind of accelerated compute just to make things faster in that sense. So.
Yeah, and I mean with incremental training, which is something that we've recently introduced, you don't have to train from scratch every time. So as you add additional training data, you're not starting from zero, right? You're starting from your last trained model and updating it. And I will say if you have like an enormous amount of training data, you might actually be able to reduce your total number of epochs as long as the training data is not super diverse, right? So basically, your training data is a sample of things from a space, right? And if the space is fairly small and you've gotten a lot of samples from it, you don't necessarily need to show all those samples to your model as many times as if you have a smaller number of samples, if that makes sense. So you might, depending on like a bunch of factors, there's no guarantee here, but you might reach like convergence and pretty stable performance in fewer epochs if you have a lot of training examples that are not describing a very large distributed space. Possibly. Try it out. The state of the art in machine learning is guess and test, and I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I feel like that's sometimes the answer people maybe don't want to hear, but it's, test 100 epochs, test 200, see what happens, so.
And maybe this is obvious, but I will say it out loud. Because we have incremental training, I would trust the 100 first, and if that's not to your specifications, keep training from there to get to 200, so that you're sort of like, taking samples as it goes along. All right, Constantine says, thank you. So Constantine was asking about the Greek being assigned a weirdly specific confidence. Is there a way to run multiple models with different pipelines without setting up Rasa multiple times? Let's say a pre-trained model for chit chat and count vectors for domain specific FAQ.
So there's no way to load in multiple models for like a single Rasa instance, but I would say it sounds like just for that use case, you could consider just kind of merging it into a single model, for handling the chit chat and I guess any other sort of use cases. Yeah, and I would say you would, as long as sort of those use cases or those features are kind of like independent in a sense, right? The way that the user asks about one thing is different from another. It would definitely work to kind of combine all those, say, end features into a single model.
Yeah. And I would say, so I think your question, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying based on the intent, I want to use a different pipeline And if you know that the intent is going to be different based on some sort of user behavior, like they've clicked on a button that says, now I'm going to ask an FAQ, then you could do like multi-bot handoff. If you want to figure out their intent and then based on that intent, use a different pre-processing pipeline, that will not work because you need to go through a pre-processing pipeline to get to the intent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I will
yeah.
just a little bit of a caution with multibot that does kind of introduce a lot of complexity because you have to figure out, right, how does it hand off between, how do you get back, how does that conversation get handed off? Yeah, so I say we definitely recommend seeing if it would work in a single bot, and then if not, then considering the multi-bot approach kind of as a second step. So
I think in general, machine learning approach would be to add more features and then more training data and then train for longer and see if it works better. Guess and test. Kotlin says, Rachel, can you make a session on deploying a chatbot using Docker Heroku Cloud that integrates with Slack, Telegram? Maybe. So this is just something. I get a lot of requests for like specific deployment examples. And when I have done them in the past with one specific example I'm thinking about, I spend a lot of time working on it. And then because it's depending on another platform, they change something without telling their users. So now my tutorial is wrong and there's no way to fix it because they just like don't support the thing that I did anymore. And that is frustrating for me, obviously, and maybe not like the best use of my time. So I will say it is possible that I will do specific deployment tutorials. The likelihood is kind of low because I've been burned before and I'm very salty about it. I might do a Heroku one though. I actually have a Heroku deployment I've gone through before. Maybe is the answer. All right, and I don't think we have any outstanding questions in the chat, either of them. So I have a question for you, Ben. If someone is putting together a proof of concept, so sort of the first step of building a bot before you get it in front of people, what would be your number one piece of advice to someone who is new to Rasa? Put you on the spot.
Ooh, this is a good question. Okay, I'm going to answer your question with another follow-up question. Who is this? Is this person like a developer creating the POC, or is it like a product person, or someone who has experience with NLU or not, or who would this person?
Let's say a developer without experience of NLU.
Okay. So the first thing would just be, or my general recommendations. Interesting question. I would think about these sort of conversation flows that you want the POC to kind of envision. So, think about in the context of like a real user experience, what that POC should do. As far as, the person comes in, they get a message, they ask something, and they kind of, model that flow and have that kind of very concretely defined. And then, from there, the step of translating that into something that, Rasa open source delivers, through stories, through dialogue management, would be the next piece. But I think just making sure in the context of your POC that you kind of very clearly defined what those happy paths should be from the user perspective.
Yeah, I think that is solid advice. Think about what it would be like to use it and what you want people to be able to do. So I don't know if you heard that. My dog came down and whined at me and then left for no reason. Okay. Chris says, I started using Rasa a month ago for my final year project, and I'm absolutely loving it. I'm constantly doing research and tests. I'm so happy to hear that, Chris. I'm delighted if you that you loved it. Enred said, I'd appreciate if you answered my question. Oh, I did miss your question. Thank you so much. I just skimmed right on over it. Is there any way we can handle unknowns, such as if an unknown statement is uttered? It is captured and sent back to the admin to incorporate the unknown intent into the dialog files. I think there's like two slightly different questions here. So one question, well, there's two slightly different ways of interpreting this question is I see text from the user that I've never seen before, or the user is trying to do something that they can't do with the assistant right now. So I would say if it's text you've never seen before, hopefully the assistant will just be able to handle it. Best case scenario.
The idea is with like configuring like a fallback mechanism, right? So if it's something you've never seen before, it's really just kind of left to field. That confidence will probably be lower, and just handling that as a particular case.
And as for a new intent that you haven't seen before, have you tried Rasa X? I think that would be a good thing to look into. Let me pop the browser up. Do we have like a nice screenshot of what the interface looks like? No, but we do have a list of things that you can do with it. So Rasa X is an interface that you connect to a Rasa assistant, and as people have conversations with your assistant, you can go through and look at them, correct annotations, add training data, add tests, run tests. I don't know if you can test from Rasa X, but you can definitely retrain your model from Rasa X, and I think retraining also runs the tests. And the thing that it sounds like you would be interested in is reviewing conversations. Here it is. So the conversation inbox. Looks like this. So you have the conversation, you have the things that your assistant has done during the conversation that aren't shown to the user but are important for you to know as your assistant is going. And you can click on these and correct them. You can click on these and correct them. You can add new intents. You can deal with stuff. So this, I think, is probably going to be your Jiminy Cricket. That's a lot of conversations. Sorry, so that there's 54,000 conversations in this assistant. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and I guess just to touch on that, so definitely in terms of like workflows, that is what we recommend. So just, using Rasa X to review conversations, you can filter by things like confidence scores and really using that as the key piece for like manual review, right? To look at those specific utterances and kind of add them back to your training data.
Hope that answered your question. I'm so sorry I missed your question. It was not intentional. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Goku says, Rasa is really cool because you can build the whole chatbot in code like machine learning without sklearn. We learned a lot working with Rasa. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm really glad you're enjoying it. Oh, thank you. And you repeated the question. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, Kevin says, oh, this is a question that I would say is nice because I have a good answer to it. I need to extract addresses, apartment number, name and number, street name, city pin code, etc. I tried using Spacey, but it only extracts city or state name. Any other library you would recommend? Do you have one you'd recommend, Ben?
I think Duckling handles that, but I'm not sure. Okay, it does? Yeah.
Pretty sure Duckling gets addresses. Yeah. So Duckling is one that we've actually built into Rasa, and it is, this is the older version. I think the newer version, the one that we have in Rasa, is not built on Clojure, it's built on Haskell. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, I'll go to their GitHub really quick.
Yeah, I'm also double checking as well. You're just looking at our Duckling image,
right? Yeah, so this is the Wid AI was acquired by Facebook, which is why this is a Facebook repo. It is Haskell. Oh, I remembered. All right, what can it do? Okay, so these are the built-in ones. Email, numeral, ordinal, phone number, blah, blah, blah. Custom dimensions. Different things. I feel like someone has written an address one before. Like I have definitely seen someone using Duckling to get an address.
Yeah, I do. I thought I remembered.
Yeah, I would do some digging and see if you can find someone's Duckling address extension module thing. Kevin says, I tried the diet classifier for the extraction of addresses, but it kind of misclassified with the name of the person. Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah, because addresses tend to follow a specific template, I think Duckling makes a lot of sense for them. I should say addresses in a specific, locale. So depending on how broad your locale is that you need to be able to handle, it may take a small to medium amount of work to start to handle it. But I would look at Duckling and I would see if somebody else has already done it, because I bet somebody has. All right. Next question from Konstantinos. Is it possible to erase the tracker store globally without doing a session restart? We use Redis and haven't managed to do it yet.
Yes. So there's kind of, I guess, two cases. So in the case that you just want to say you're using Redis for the tracker store and you want to just clear like events from the database, then you could just basically create like a script that runs through and just deletes tracker items, and that will work. But delete tracker items. Yeah,
and
you would
be something that you trigger as an action, or that you'd run on your server manual?
Yeah, so the latter. You'd have to run that basically on your server, and have it connect to the Redis instance that Rasa is connected to, and have it clear conversations in that way. Because there really isn't a way to do it directly inside of Rasa open source as far as clearing that data. So it does have to be external.
Yeah, hopefully that helps. I think I actually missed a question from Chris. I feel like I don't usually do this, but maybe I've been doing it all along and I just haven't noticed. Ooh, sorry. About interactive learning. Let's say I deployed my chatbot into my own Android app. That's possible, right? Yes. How can I get feedback from users? Maybe a like-dislike system that sends me back a story.
Well, kind of in that same line, I think like a feedback mechanism, right? Putting that in your stories. So if they complete a task, defined in your stories and in your train model, prompting the user for it, was that a good experience or not? And kind of using that, ideally through Rasa X, right? Being able to filter those intents and those responses to look at or keep track of those conversations. So
yeah, I would also probably do it as part of a story. There might be a way to I am not an Android developer, but I do know some, and I'm pretty sure there's a way to like trigger, based on someone's been using this chatbot for so long, like a little dialogue that's like, hey, are you enjoying this? And then people can do it, and doing that outside of Rasa. But I think it'll probably be simplest, depending on your comfort level with Android development generally, to do it in Rasa.
yeah, I think in Rasa would be a little easier just because that lets you basically take it back to your story. But yeah, I think either way would work, and it sort of depends on whether you'd like this feedback to kind of apply on all platforms you're connected to, or just on the Android app. So.
And I will say I know some people have been working on this in research, so you might have seen like some discussion about it at every turn, having people like enter sentiment data about how they're feeling. Don't do that. That's annoying. Like every time you say something, you have to be like, smiley face, frowning face, smiley face, frowning face. I think it's interesting from a research standpoint, but awful from a user's experience standpoint. Kevin wants to know, is it possible to have all the training data for each intent in MySQL or some database and use that data to train my models so that each time I wish to add new training data, I don't need to add them to my NLU file?
So you can, but the caveat is you still, in the context of Rasa, it still needs to see that YAML file. So you would have to basically create, a script or some process that pulls your SQL data and converts it into something that Rasa can parse. But yeah, as far as training, it does have to be kind of in that specific format in our YAML training data. So.
Hopefully that helps. Harris says, regarding removing intents models in upcoming Rasa release, what will be the effect on the future of conversational AI? First I will say, I would be very surprised if we ever got rid of them entirely. I think that's a very useful proxy, but I also don't think that every turn needs to have an intent. So I think in general, it'll make it more flexible and better to use, is my stance. I don't know, what do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're definitely a very long way from, being able to just not have intents altogether. And I think for us, putting in that end-to-end learning feature, doing it with intent is more kind of a first step, right? Kind of as an experiment to see. But yeah, we're definitely, I would say, not really close to being able to just get rid of intents altogether. So.
But I mean, because we have a research team and because we are sort of thinking into the future and like what's possible with this technology in ways that it might change, a big part of that is just sort of imagining and having a goal and working towards that. But that doesn't mean that it's coming in the next release. Necessarily. Sometimes it is. Kevin says, thanks for this video. They're really helpful. Oh, I'm glad they're helpful. Chris says, I have zero experience with mobile development except Unity lol, but I need to learn it for my project and finish the app before May. Oof, good luck. Is it Kotlin that someone was mentioning to me is really nice for mobile development? Might be a language you use, because I think that you can use it for either Android or iOS. But also I know a lot of Android development is just in Java, so if you already know Java, that might work. Android development is like something I know about vaguely, but have never done. Good luck.
Yeah, and I think, does Unity, I thought that Unity could integrate with iOS, but I'm not sure. But that's what I thought. But yeah, May, it's coming up, so.
We got a little time, but I know even less about iOS development than I do about Android development, so that might be an approach. Singu says, I have a few variations in my NLU dataset where the same word should be tagged as an entity A in one sentence, and tagged as entity B in another sentence. Any tips on handling these while using diet classifier? I would say, first of all, that's only going to work in diet. If you have any sort of dependency between an entity and an intent, and even then it's going to be a little funky.
Yeah, and I think one thing to maybe look into would be entity roles and groups. So if you can just use a single entity and just attach a certain role to that, which will be available in your dialog manager. I guess that's the only thing that comes to mind.
And I think just to step back from it a little bit, why do they have to be the same entity? Why do they have to be different entities? Would it be possible for them to be the same entity and then assigned to a slot, for example, by a different? So by default, if a slot has the same name as an entity, the entity will be just shuffled into there automatically. But it doesn't have to be, right? You could fill a slot in other ways as well, so that might be helpful in that case. Yeah, I would say that's going to be rough. My strong intuition is that you're going to have very low accuracy on that task if it's the exact same text string. Here says, thanks, much appreciated. I'm working on the safety of conversational assistance, and this is maybe a thing in the future, at least is what I think. And I think Harris, again, apologize if I saying that incorrectly, was asking about the intents and getting rid of them. I would say that my strong stance is that we can't just be doing dialogue systems end to end without any sort of supervision or structuring the data or limiting of what the assistant says, because it goes off the rails real quick. And we are right at time. I don't know if you can stick around for a little bit longer, Ben. We got 1 or 2 more questions, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. I could stay for a couple minutes. Yeah.
All right, in that case, we have a question from Kevin. Kotlin has JVM, so good for mobile development. Thank you. And Chris says, yeah, we use Kotlin and Java. I'm glad that the thing I vaguely remembered was actually relevant. Kevin says, any guidance on structuring intents and entities as a bot grows? I used to have a lot of intents to capture each new inquiry, but started grouping them together with entities used to disambiguate. 10 out of 10, that is absolutely my recommendation. Yeah.
Yes. I want to say, I think it was Kevin, you answered your own question. And yes, this is very much our recommendation.
Yeah, it is easier to extract a large number of entities than it is to correctly sort text into a large number of intents. As long as you're not in a situation where the entities are the exact same text, that is very difficult. And Constantina says, one last question before you finished. Can you let us know if there's going to be any more tickets available for the Summit workshop? Sold out now. I'm afraid the workshops are completely sold out. There's a sort of a hands-on component, so from the instructors, so there is a limit to how big they can be. But we do have our certification is on Udemy as well. Let me pull that up real quick so you can see that. So if you're interested in getting Rasa certified, Udemy certification. I believe the Udemy certification hasn't been updated to 2.x yet. It's still 1.x, but the general concepts haven't changed. It's really just a lot of the syntax. So this is the official Rasa certification workshop on Udemy if you would like to work on your own. But yeah, unfortunately, the Summit workshops are all sold out. All right. Thank you, everybody, for the good questions. I think we had a lot of good discussion today. I hope it was helpful. I certainly enjoyed it. And thank you so much, Ben, for joining and sharing your knowledge is the word I was looking for. I'm all out of coffee.
Yeah, of course, it's been great. Office hours are always fun, and yeah, we had some great questions, some really interesting ones. Yeah, it's awesome.
And if you have any other questions, take it over to the forum. The link is below, and we'll do our best to get them answered. All right. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. Tomorrow we will be reading a paper. We're going to be starting on the stochastic parrots paper, which is sort of about some of the potential pitfalls and drawbacks of really big language models. And then on Friday, we're going to be doing some live coding. Next week, we're not going to have any live streams because it's the Rasa Summit. So check that out if you are interested, and they overlap in time. And then the week after that, we will be back on our usually scheduled business. So see you then. Thanks so much for joining, Ben. Thanks for joining, everybody. And we'll talk to you.